One of the big buzzwords these days is cloud. And no, we're not talking about the things that carry rain up in the sky, but of course, off-premises software, apps, and other things to help your organization do whatever it needs to do within the context of digital signage and internal or external communications. Cloud is becoming a major factor, and so we're going to talk about cloud digital signage versus on-premise digital signage today with Sean Matthews, President and CEO of Visix Incorporated.
Hello, Derek. How are you, sir?
Excellent. Thanks for talking to me today.
Yes, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Sean, for talking to me today, and thank you, everybody out there, for listening. As always, I'd like to remind you that you can subscribe to this podcast, Digital Signage Done Right. This is Digital Signage Done Right. Whether you're new to digital signage or a seasoned pro, this podcast gives you practical advice about systems, communications, and content to better engage your audience. I'm Derek DeWitt, Communications Specialist for Visix. Welcome to Digital Signage Done Right. So let's just do kind of a really basic definition here. What's the difference between cloud digital signage software and on-premise digital signage software? Because it seems counterintuitive, or at least it might for some people, like digital signs are clearly on-premise. So how can the software be located elsewhere?
So, the fundamental difference between cloud versus on-premise software, when you get down to it, is just where it resides. On-premise software is installed locally on your business computers or your university computers and servers, whereas the cloud software is hosted on somebody else's server. In our case, it would be our servers. And it's accessed via a web browser. So it's not a locally installed application. And there's a lot to consider when you start thinking about cloud versus on-premise software. And obviously, that's what we're going to chat about today.
So let's talk about cloud first. What are the advantages of cloud digital signage, and what are some of the disadvantages?
Yeah, there's a long list of items here, Derek. We'll kind of go through some of these just so that everybody understands some of the advantages and disadvantages going either way. Of course, if it's in the cloud, you have anywhere, anytime access. So anywhere you have access to a browser, you'll have access to the digital signage platform. It's affordable. The costs are predictable because it's a monthly fee that's amortized over the year. It's worry-free IT support because you're not really having to maintain a server on your own premises. And there are high levels of security, but security is always a question. It's much easier to get your digital signage system and deployment up and running faster than you might be able to do it yourself with your own servers. Obviously, it's very scalable because it's using cloud computing and the distribution of servers. And of course, a lot of people don't think about this, but if you run a lot of servers in your building, you're consuming energy. In fact, not only the energy of the servers themselves, but the HVAC that's required to help maintain a temperature there in that environment.
Which you're paying for that electricity.
That's correct. Yes. And so that's one of those things. If you put everything in the cloud, then you've actually reduced the cost of that operational overhead just from an energy consumption perspective. Of course, there are some, disadvantages to the cloud product offering, and there's some advantages to the on-premise offering. The total cost of ownership, which is something that most people don't think about because it seems so inexpensive when you go to the cloud. But the total cost of ownership after approximately 3 years is actually higher if you go on the cloud versus if you just were to CapEx the entire project up front. Another advantage, of course, to the on-premise version is that you have complete control. You have control of the hardware, the data, all the platforms and apps that get added to the server. So, you have a lot of configuration advantages when it comes to having stuff, on premise. In terms of accessibility, basically everyone has access to the internet. It seems like almost all the time. But, with an on-premise system, you don't have to rely on the internet at all, right? So you don't have any external factors that play into, your digital signage platform. So there are definitely some advantages to on-premise as well.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, obviously way more control. You don't need to have internet if you're doing on premises, but of course you do if you're doing like you're pulling from data sources and things like that. You need some kind of connection there.
Yeah, correct. I mean, if you're running some applications that are already in the cloud and you're going to be pulling data from those applications, and of course, you have to have some internet access there anyway. Unfortunately, for a lot of companies that would prefer to maintain, the systems themselves, they're being forced into cloud deployments in cases where they may not want to.
Are there certain kinds of organizations that maybe it makes more sense for one or the other option? Like I'm thinking of government agencies and things like that. Very often security is paramount for them, which is why sometimes it can take a long time to get a system up and running. I mean, the digital signage system doesn't need to be air gapped or anything like that. But, I could see like a government agency saying we actually want on premise because that way we have more control over it. But does it make sense like for a university? Is it better for them to use cloud or on premise, or does it really matter? Or is it a case by case basis?
Yeah, really. I mean, it's a case by case thing, Derek. I mean, if you look at some of our clients, I'll use two examples. The Federal Reserve Bank, they're probably not going to ever do anything in the cloud. I can't even imagine. I would have to believe that there are probably some infrastructure guidance and or regulations that basically prevent them from accessing things via the cloud. I mean, obviously, large portions of all operations are in the cloud these days, but I'm sure that in our case with them, they're using an on-premise solution because they just didn't want to tee up all of the analysis to confirm whether or not we might meet all those security requirements. Another example, which is very similar to them, but this is a commercial entity, is the Intercontinental Exchange, which are the owners of the NASDAQ. So obviously there's a lot that's in the cloud when it comes to NASDAQ. I mean, we all see real-time reporting of, stocks and tickers and all those kinds of things. But when it gets down to fundamental use of business-to-business applications, there are a lot of security requirements in place that you just aren't going to be able to meet with a digital signage solution that's hosted in the cloud. But to your point about does it make sense for a university? Well, that's a great question because there's more to it than just is it hosted or is it on premise? Because there's also, as I mentioned earlier, the total cost of ownership. And if you think about a lot of universities, it's not necessarily where the software is located, but how are you going to pay for it? And so often universities are governed by state budgets, and those budgets often are tied to basically capital expenditures, right, that do not come out of the operational budget. And so when you look at the cost, often universities can't project that they're going to have monies available under the operational expense budget to pay for digital signage in years 2, 3, 4, et cetera. So they are often find themselves in a situation where they're going to have to use their capital expenditure budget monies to go ahead and fully deploy a digital signage solution, which means it's probably going to be on premise because they're not going to be able to, again, project that they'll have budget monies for multiple years in advance to support their digital signage investment.
Right, that makes sense. How about like if I'm doing, say, a large deployment versus a small deployment? Again, is there an advantage one over the other?
Well, I certainly think there is a slight advantage to those that choose cloud for these large-scale deployments, simply because the data centers can be located in various parts of the world, right? So that now your access to the various servers is, I want to say, more localized or more regional. But I think the real advantage is there's just a lot of scalability when it comes to the cloud and the overall cloud platform in general. And it would be more difficult to maintain that level of scalability in an on-premise environment. You would just have additional responsibilities as an organization to really maintain that level of scalability.
Have there been any examples in your personal experience of people switching from one to the other? Like they went cloud and then after, say, 3 or 4 years, they said, you know what, let's go ahead and plunk down for the on-premise so we don't have to keep paying for this, or the other way around?
Yeah, actually, with the advent and the deliverability of our Signage Suite platform, we see a whole rash of legacy clients of ours who were accustomed to our old platform and often had that old platform in on-premise environment. We see almost 80% of them now migrating to our cloud solution. And I think that when I have conversations with those clients, I get a sense that they just believe it's easier to maintain because it's not something that they have to worry about. And there's often, this challenge of keeping servers up and running and, any sort of power outages that trip up a server, it creates more work for the client in the long run. This isn't really a mission critical platform, so it can easily get lost, sort of in the corner of the server room. And I think that in general, most clients just view this as a support advantage by moving it to the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that more and more things, not just digital signage, but a lot of things that we use on a day-to-day basis, either as individuals or as organizations of all kinds, it's going more and more towards the cloud. It seems almost like the industry is pushing for eventually everything will be in the cloud. I think some of the things you talked about are factors in that.
Well, I mean, you just mentioned that someday everything is going to be in the cloud, and that's certainly quite possible. A lot of people talk about how long has cloud computing been around, and really, when you get down to it, software as a service has been around for a really long time. It really started in the 60s, and as you roll forward into modern times, you can just reflect back, just over 20 years ago when you look at the .com era and how far software as a service went in the .com era. I mean, prior to that, there wasn't really online commercial access to shopping and retail platforms, and there wasn't even really accepted and or effective ways to spend money online and securely purchase goods and services, that sort of thing. So, but when you really move forward past the .com era, and then you start getting into the 2000s, and you see companies like Salesforce come online, I mean, that's when you really start to see business to business, software as a service really start to take off. It's easy to confuse cloud with the advantage of, let's say, desktop applications. So, when you think about cloud, what we're really talking about is accessing an application via a browser, right? And that's really what you're doing. But not every product truly lends itself to being a software as a service. So when I mentioned things like Salesforce, really it's a large database and you're accessing data, right? And that's pretty easy to move via a browser or over the web. But when you start looking at applications like, let's say, Photoshop or a higher end digital signage design application for creating layouts, those products really aren't geared towards operation in a browser. And so, when you even think about products like Adobe and they talk about their Creative Cloud, well, the application itself is running on your desktop. Now, you might be accessing a lot of things, fonts and images and that kind of stuff, but the application itself, it resides on your desktop machine. And, that's really the case with our product today. Our design product is a desktop application and it runs on your desktop, and, it has enormous functionality, and the results of your designs get synchronized to the CMS, which is in the cloud. And then that's how ultimately it gets delivered out to the media players. But I only bring this up because I'm not convinced to this day that we're 10 years away from, quote unquote, everything being in the cloud. Because I was just reading the other day an article about AutoCAD, which has always been a very powerful and processing intensive application. So their web version of AutoCAD, and they basically coin it as such, it is a light version of AutoCAD.
Yeah, sure. Because that's an incredibly robust. People joke about, how complicated and resource hungry Photoshop is. AutoCAD is a very robust software platform.
It would be difficult from a programmatic perspective to put all of that functionality in a browser. And in fact, the browsers, which are, have become basically their own operating system, still may not be capable of running all of those features in a browser.
Maybe some companies like Photoshop, for example, I'm sure that they've done studies. I haven't bothered to look, but I'm sure there are studies that they've conducted. Look, we have X number of options in the Photoshop app or software, and yet 90% of the people use these 20. which kind of lends itself to, well, then why not do a light version for those people? And the people who do need all of those features, well, they're going to find a different solution, which will probably be an on-premise or some kind of a hybrid.
You're spot on there. Some people ask about, the functionality of our design tools in the browser, and they're pretty limited when compared to the desktop application. So, we fit more of that hybrid role where we are using desktop applications with synchronization to the CMS, again, for the purpose of delivering content to your displays. But it is not a true software as a service where it's fully accessible just as a browser.
So now Visix uses Azure for their cloud services, yes?
We do. In fact, we made that decision about 8 months ago, and we decided that we had been using various other providers with data centers in the United States. And we were having more and more clients who are multinational corporations. And, we needed to be able to scale up our multi-tenant platform at a very high level. And we just didn't think it made sense with some of the other providers we looked at. We maybe could save some money, but when it came to scalability, security, support, we thought that the Microsoft Azure platform was a good fit for us and our clients. And thus far, we've been quite happy with it.
Why do you think it lends itself to your context specifically?
Historically, our multi-tenant offering was not very scalable. And the computing power that we needed now, that we can add literally hundreds of tenants to a single server, we just felt like that we needed a more robust platform. And we think we found that in the Azure platform.
Now, when you get a platform like this that is so robust and has so many possibilities associated with it, I would imagine that one of the concerns would also be security, because like we said with government offices, but everybody, FSS, corporate offices want it, universities want it, even hospitals want it. Security is an important issue. How is cloud dealing with the whole data security conversation? Because, nowadays stuff gets a little bit weird on the international stage, and suddenly I find all of my software starts updating every 48 hours with yet another update. How does that all fit in with cloud?
Well, the security question definitely, it comes up in the cloud conversation. And the reality is, in an on-premise environment, if you have the very best security experts that you can possibly employ, they can create security parameters and a security infrastructure that meet all of your expectations, right? But what you might be paying for that security may actually be greater than its true benefit. Now, if you take somebody like Microsoft, they're quite the security experts themselves. So when compared to what we might have had at a more regional provider, clearly we believe that there's an advantage going the Microsoft route. Now, you could argue that a brand like Microsoft could easily be a target for someone that might want to go cause harm and try to bring down a particular network. But the reality is that when you talk to a lot of security experts, they all agree that if someone is out there fishing for weaknesses, they're not going to spend a lot of time with the likes of Amazon or Google or even Microsoft. Those are high profile targets, but the amount of energy that you might spend trying to claim a victory in some sort of security hack is quite high. By comparison, there are other places that you could go to wreak havoc if that was your intention. And it's been our observation thus far that our clients are definitely have an advantage by being on the Azure platform when compared to other options that we had in the past.
Now, having a cloud offering, does that present difficulties when you're developing new stages to the software, new apps, new widgets, and so on? Or does it make it easier, or does it not really factor into development?
I don't believe that it really factors into the developmental process at all, or the development process at all. I will say this, though. If we add features that want to be accessible through the browser, so if we start to expand our design tools, place more of those feature sets in the browser accessible, user interface, that does pose, certainly some programmatic issues because, there's not just one browser in the world. There are certainly more than one, even though it seems almost like ubiquitous that there is just one. But, there are different versions to that browser as well. Not everyone maintains updates just because they choose not to.
Which they should. You should be updating the stuff you use every day. Just going to say it again, folks.
Correct. But, we obviously run into problems like that all the time where people aren't current, and particularly in business environments, which is often very different than what you and I do as consumers. There's often, a lot of controls in business environments that don't even allow employees to update, browsers and other things. They don't have the administrative rights to even download those updates. So in short, I don't believe that supporting product in the cloud really adds any more software development time or headache to the process.
One of the reasons I ask is, way back when you guys first started in the digital signage space, there really wasn't much in the way of competition, and now there are a lot of little companies showing up more all the time, offering some kind of cloud-only digital signage solution to people. Is that because the cloud technology has made that easy to do, or is it just that it's quick and easy to get a company up doing this stuff, or what do you think is the cause behind all that? Because this, I'm sure you're completely aware of it. You have now lots of little guys out there.
Derek, there are a lot of players in the digital signage space. When we first got started in '99, there really weren't any competitors in this space. And now, as you noted, they're everywhere. But there's also been some consolidation in space, and there's been a lot of equity investment that has rolled up a lot of operations. And of course, the pandemic even accelerated some of that. People found themselves, I think, in some difficult financial positions, and they chose to go the equity route or the acquisition route in order to help them survive, really, quite frankly. But the ability to go out and programmatically build a user interface that allows people to simply upload content and schedule when and where it's going to play, I mean, there's not a huge barrier to entry, and it's not necessarily a cloud thing or not. It's just that when you can develop software and deliver it via the cloud, you can deliver it to a lot of people at a lot lower cost. So again, the financial barrier to entry to start from scratch and build a cloud-only software as a service for digital signage is quite low. And so that's what has, I think, spurred a lot of people to get into this space. And of course, for us as a long-term player in this environment, we realize the value of the richness and the depth of the feature set that we have and the broader customer service and support infrastructure that we have. That really, quite frankly, is one of the real differences between us and a lot of the sort of upstart players. And I'm not minimizing those guys. I'm just saying that there's clearly some differences structurally when it comes to business support in enterprise environments.
So what do you think? What do you think the future holds? First off, do you think that we're going to see yet more digital signage or digital signage-like companies proliferate, or are we going to see a point sometime in the future where, look, the tech is the tech, and some companies are just going to fall by the wayside, and we're going to end up like we have in a lot of other fields with just a handful of players?
To be quite frank, I don't envision a day in the future where there's only a handful of players. Despite the arrival of equity investment in this market space and some consolidation that has occurred, I view this space as being more like what you would find in the ERP or online accounting world. There's lots and lots of players in that space. And I believe that the same will hold true here because, as we look at the movement to standardize hardware like bright sign media players and other things like that, you're going to see, I believe, a lot more people building unique user interfaces for very specific types of offerings. One might, for example, be simply menu boards for, small restaurants and small restaurant chains. And what you might also see is, environments where people are building user interfaces very specifically for, gas stations or independently owned gas stations. Or
Because someone like that doesn't need, all this. They're like, we're never going to data map. We're never going to, pull in all this stuff from spreadsheets and so on. We need 2 screens up, and we have a pretty limited offering of what we're going to be showing on there.
Correct. Yes. And in fact, that's almost like PowerPoint editing and then playing it on, large form factor displays. And so there's a whole market out there for those kinds of things. And when you think about, the segmentation of markets for us, everything from higher education to corporate campus to manufacturing and even healthcare. All of those markets want something a little bit different. And that doesn't even include what you might find in hospitality or quick serve restaurants or, gas stations or other retail applications. So there's a lot of market segmentation, and there's no real universal answer that can meet all of those market needs.
So do you think we're going to see more cloud-based digital signage options out there for the consumers, for organizations? Or is it going to be like it is today, which is some in cloud, some not?
No, I do believe, Derek, when we talk to people that are interested in our business from an investment perspective, what they're all focused on is, what does the cloud solution look like? How do you minimize client churn? What are your renewal rates look like? What does the compounding number look like, from renewing those subscriptions? And so I honestly believe that there will be less and less desktop development in the digital signage market space, just because as the technology becomes more ubiquitous and what people are expecting to see on screen may be very similar to what you see in website design with templated products like WordPress and other things like that. My belief is that in the end, you'll see more cloud, you'll see less and less desktop applications, and consumers will have a lot of choices in the B2B market space about what types of platforms they prefer and what it is they intend for them to do as it relates to what's on screen. It's just going its own way. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like there's somebody out there just driving this, it's all cloud or nothing. It's just happening in general business environments where the expectation is for these non-mission critical platforms that they just be in the cloud because it's easier to maintain.
And like you said, that lower initial cost, at least for the first few years, has got to be tempting for some organizations, especially if they've been tasked with, what might seem like an impossible task. Hey, we want to get digital signage up, and we need it up in 3 months.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's certain. That low cost to entry is definitely appealing. What we've noticed is, as of recent, we have some competition that is renewing their subscriptions, and they're renewing them at minimum terms, meaning like you have to renew for 3 years. And see, that's kind of crazy, because the beauty of being in the cloud is if you don't like it, you can walk away from it, right? Like, as a business, if we're disappointed in the feature set, the services, et cetera, we just walk away and go to another one. But if you start, enforcing these multi-year contracts up front, this is, an interesting, new trend that we're seeing from one competitor in particular. And I'm a little surprised by that direction. A lot of industries, go through this evolution, and some players are completely lost in the whole evolution of the industry, and then others succeed and thrive, in these new environments. And often, we're talking about these like lots of little competitors. There are some barriers to entry from a sustainability and relevance perspective, man. I mean, to go out and buy Google AdWords for digital signage in our market space, a single click can be as much as $29. And some people may say, oh, that seems kind of low. Well, no, to me, 40 cents is low, but not $29, right? For everyone that clicks on this ad, right? And, you better have a lot of money if you're going to try to be competitive in that regard, right? Just because you say stuff is free doesn't mean people will buy it.
Digital signage is a comprehensive tool for both internal communications and communications with the public for any size organization and for any kind of organization. And more people are starting to find advantages to going to the cloud. And I think it's safe to say that cloud is here to stay in some way, shape, or form. It's been an interesting conversation. I've kind of thought about this, but not that deeply. Not as deeply as clearly you have, because you had some things to say that I had not really considered.
Well, I enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you having me on. And, hopefully, someone maybe picked up a little nugget here and there about some advantages to the cloud and or on-premise versions of digital signage platforms. And, look forward to having another conversation with you in the future.
All right. My guest has been Sean Matthews, President and CEO of Visix Digital Signage in Atlanta, Georgia. I'd like to thank Sean for talking to me today and everybody out there for listening.
Great. Thank you, Derek.
Hey, want more free stuff? Then head to the resources section of Visix.com for free masterclass guides, blogs, videos, and more to help you with your digital signs. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review of this episode and connect with us on social media.